I recently hit 1700 on chess.com, and I just want to share 3 of the lessons I learned during this process. But first, let me show you the last 2 games that I won to get me to 1700, and then it'll make a lot more sense what I'm trying to say. So here we have a Vienna Gambit. Usually, black will play d5. That's like by far and away the most popular response. It's the most dynamic, and they go ahead and challenge the center. Well, in this case, my opponent opts to accept the gambit, which is not something that is typically done at this level. And if we want to go to the master level, which is obviously above my level, out of a total of 2,400 games, so over 2,000 games played, e takes f4 has been played 34 times. So not a popular option at all. And the reason why it's not popular is because it allows white to play e5, boot the knight away, and immediately take a big center. That's what happens, and white's not completely winning, but it's definitely a solid position. However, I already goof it up. I'm mentally trash talking my opponent. I'm like, they really took on f4. Like, what is this guy doing? And then I break a cardinal rule of the Vienna Gambit, and that is that you always have to protect your dark squares. Because in the Vienna Gambit, when you push your f-pawn, you inherently weaken your dark squares. And this allows queen h4, which runs into 2 different options for white. You can play either king d2 or you can play g3. G3 gets really crazy because, this king is completely exposed. After takes, king f1. I mean, this doesn't look pleasant at all. So for that reason, I actually played king d2 and trying to hide my king in plain sight in the middle of the board. But on the bright side, at least black has no pieces developed. After f6, I simply move my knight back. The queen moves out of the way, and we get a check. I jump forward with knight d5, which is a fake threat, or an empty threat. All it is saying, oh, 2 pieces are attacking your bishop. But guess what? Their knight's actually covering, so they don't have to do anything. But right away, on move 11, my opponent blunders significantly. I mean, they're trying to protect this bishop an extra time, but in the meantime, we get to grab the giant fork out, okay? This is move 11. My opponent's taken less than 30 seconds of their time across these 11 moves, and they blunder the big giant fork, and from here, things go downhill. They just play g5. I played d5 because I'm like, well, your king's in the middle. I want to take advantage of these light squares. They move, we trade, and basically they immediately blunder a nice mate in 2. Simple, right? Overall, my opponent, number 1, didn't really know their openings, and number 2, they didn't spend any time revealing any of their moves before making very, very obvious blunders. So those are some 2 main observations from this game. Obviously, my opponent's just under 1600. So what about when I play someone who is 1700? Now, it says that I'm already 1706, but this is my rating after the game. Obviously, spoilers, I win this game, but let's see how. We have an Alapin Sicilian. If you want to learn more how to play it, I'll put a link into a video below where I go through a lot of the main lines. Then we have d5, and in this case, I take, and I put my pawn on d4. And after take and take, I'm okay. I have a isolated pawn, but at the same time, I'm trying to win tempo by playing knight c3. And usually, black doesn't allow this. Usually, what black does is they play knight c6 because they want to put pressure. If you do this now, then you just give up a free pawn for no reason. So, knight c6 or even e5 are options, or to just delay the move knight c3 by white. But they don't do that. They're like, oh, whatever, that's fine. Again, not like a completely winning advantage, just it's nice to be able to develop with tempo, and that's what I'm trying to do. Okay, so now we get e6, we get bishop to b5, it's a check. They block with the bishop. I decide to castle first, and now we trade light square bishops off. I centralize the rook. They get ready to castle, but now I hit their queen with tempo. The queen moves, and I say, you know what? Let's go for this, because if you want to castle, knight g6 is a nice little trick. I'm conveniently defending this bishop, which is hitting your queen, And if you move your queen, then I simply take the rook, right? So even if you do this, then I'll probably just take, and then take, and I'm up in exchange. I'm quite happy. So instead, my opponent does not castle. They just play queen to b6. They want to get out of any sort of nonsense that I have. And now after queen b6, I play queen e2. I'm trying to, put more stuff on the center file, protect the b pawn, and we go from there. Castles, bishop e3. These are just kind of shuffling moves, but honestly, just trying to improve the pieces. Put the rook on the central file. Maybe at some point push d5. Okay, and here I definitely lost the plot a little bit. I played knight to g4. I immediately realized it didn't really have a purpose, so I went back and I played knight e5. And look, that's okay. Sometimes in chess and in life, you just need to accept the fact that you made a mistake and go back. Try again. Fortunately, my opponent plays knight b to d5, and it's not really doing anything. I just take, and I back up my bishop, and he puts his rook on an open file. I immediately challenge this open file. He plays queen b6, and then I play knight to d7, which is a nice little fork. I wouldn't say this is a giant fork. It is much more like a small fork. You know, it's not actually doing a crazy amount of stuff. Obviously, it's still winning a rook, but you have to be careful because there's plenty of counterplay. My opponent, didn't have Stockfish telling them that it was basically zeros. Instead, they just hit the resign button. But if we take a deeper look at this, queen takes b2, because that's been hanging, right? Okay, knight takes f8, and what are black's options? Well, they could take this rook, and depending on how white takes back, if rook takes c1 is played, bishop takes f8, and it's not super clear. Like, black has counterplay. They have a 2-on-1 on the queen side, and at some point, maybe they can convert that to a passed pawn. Passed pawns are very powerful in endgames, right? And a lot of pieces are off the board. Even though this is slightly better for white, it's not game over yet. But, of course, if white had played after rook takes c1, instead of rook takes c1, bishop takes c1, now it makes it much, much more easy because I think when the queens come off the board, then it's a different story where this rook is probably going to be able to infiltrate or pick off the b pawn a little bit more easily. But again, there's still counterplay, and my opponent just immediately hit the resign button after getting forked. Meanwhile, I was ready to sweat it out and work pretty hard to convert this. But that being said, it's time for the moral of the story. What are the 3 lessons that I learned while reaching 1700? I actually reached 1700 only a couple months after reaching 1600. And it surprised me how quickly I made that transition because people kept making mistakes like this. And I think that's lesson number 1, is that you shouldn't fear anyone's rating. The rating is an average of their performance. It is not their performance every single game. So of course, people are human, and their performance is not going to be a straight line or something that's steady. It's going to be all over the place, especially if you're not a master player. Number 2 is that you should not rush. Don't rush, because you have time on your clock for a reason. Both of my opponents used less than 2 minutes of their time, and they just blundered everything away. Or they incorrectly analyzed the position and hit the resign button, which I also consider a blunder. Time management is such an important skill, and please do not rush, because if you make these very fast blunders, it will always feel like you're not actually maximizing your potential. Last but not least, the lesson number 3 is don't give up. Just because you make one mistake, whether it's in the opening, like my opponent in the first game, or it's a simple fork or something where you lose a little bit of material, just always look for counterplay. Look for compensation. Look for any reason where you can create counterplay and give your opponent a difficult time in converting. You never know when your opponent will make a mistake, and you can take that to your advantage and get back to a draw or get back to a winning position. So never give up, and you'll be surprised that a little bit of resilience can go a long way. I hope this helps in your chess journey, and if you are still trying to get to 1600, then check out this video right here with a more formal explanation of everything that you need to do to get to 1600 rapid. Happy learning, everyone.